Hi, this is Tom Sedlack, General Manager of 33rd Company Property Management. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy day to watch this video on residential rental properties and on property management. This video will answer the question for you, what is the rental market all about? It'll introduce you to the rental market, to rental properties and investment properties, and how to maximize your returns with the assets that you have. In this 5-part video on property management, we're going to talk about all sorts of things relevant to residential rental properties. Number 1, how do we screen tenants, including how to find considerate, responsible adults who will take care of your property year in, year out. We'll talk about tax benefits, which are significant. You can depreciate your home and get a significant annual tax break for your rental properties. We'll talk about marketing your property. 33rd Company has some of the best marketing available when it comes to residential rental properties. We'll also talk about leases. What does a lease look like? How do you make sure you have a landlord-friendly lease that will protect you and your property? We'll talk about maintenance, the episodic, non-recurring, and tenant-requested maintenance that does happen from time to time, and how do we handle it? We'll also talk about managing tenants. We'll also talk about the pet decision and how it affects your cash flow, move-ins, move-outs, and transitions, damages should they occur at the end of a tenancy and how we reconcile them. And lastly, we'll talk about how do we keep that home in top condition and ready to rent at the end of every lease. 33rd Company has been around since 1993. We are a rock-solid management company and one of only 50 CRMC residential management companies nationally. We work with investors, CPAs, tax attorneys, accountants, and many individual homeowners who cannot sell their homes and want to convert them into investment properties. In fact, we manage well over $100 million worth of residential rental properties every day, and we have the talent and experience needed to take good care of your largest asset. The benefits of owning rental properties, of course, are excellent. They include tax benefits, current income, equity buildup, long-term appreciation, and immediate cash flow, and we can help turn your liability into one of your greatest assets. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the video, and I think you'll come away much better educated about what the rental market is all about and what 33rd Company can do to help you. Okay, let's start with our first topic on screening tenants, probably one of the most critical things that a management company can do for you. As you will find out in part 2 of this video series, there are a lot of tax benefits with rental properties, but not having good tenants can take a lot of wind out of your sails with regard to your overall return. 33rd Company takes tenant screening very seriously, and in fact, our results show it. In 2010, we had no evictions at all on any of our managed rental properties, and typically we have less than 5 evictions annually across the board on well over $100 million of managed residential real estate. How do we get there? Good, consistent screening. We first start by requiring that every adult 18 years or older, it doesn't matter whether they're married or not, they each have to fill out a rental application detailing all of their personal information, including credit, income, and criminal history. Then, each adult, 18 years or older, doesn't matter whether they're married or not, we screen them. We look for 2-year rental history, homeowner history, we do a full landlord reference check. The income level to qualify for the home is 3 times the rent. In other words, if the rent for a typical single-family home is $1,500 a month, each individual adult has to make $4,500 a month in income in order to qualify. The only exception we make is if they're married or they commingle their finances jointly. Then they're allowed to share their joint income to qualify for that income standard. But if they're unrelated adults, they each have to make $4,500 in gross monthly income because if a roommate leaves during the tenancy, the other one has to be able to pay. So that's a very important distinction. Our occupancy standards allow for a maximum of 2 people per bedroom. So if we have a 3-bedroom home, for instance, the maximum safe occupancy that we would allow during the tenancy would be 6 people, 2 people per bedroom. We also don't want to lease to more than 3 unrelated adults. This is an investment property for you. It's a market rate property. It's not a rent share situation where none of the adults can individually qualify for the rent. We want to make sure that you don't dilute the responsibility of the lease too much amongst too many unrelated people. This is a very good standard that we use to make sure that the tenants are each vested in taking good care of the property during the tenancy. The next thing we do is we pull their credit report for each individual adult. We look at their full Experian credit file and we perform a discrepancy-based screen. We're not a lazy property management company. We're not just going to say 650 and above approved, 649 and below denied. That's a terrible way to screen for tenancy. What we want to do is look at the discrepancies. How many discrepancies do they have? Are there any trends in their discrepancies? We look at all their payment history in their credit report. How many issues do they have in their credit report? Are there any NSFs, for instance, PL write-offs, bankruptcies, foreclosures? We're going to look at all those things in the credit report because, again, we want to make sure that not only can they pay today, but will they pay tomorrow and the next month and so on, and are they fundamentally responsible so that they're going to be taking care of the home as well during the tenancy. We'll also look at some things like their utility bills. Are they paying their basic utility bills on time? If they're not going to pay their water bill on time, it's probably a given that they're not going to be taking care of the home or changing their furnace filter or mowing the yard on a regular basis. So again, those are things that 33rd Company can look at to make sure, again, we have the most responsible and considerate adults possible for your rental home. You're extending credit when you're renting a home, and screening for credit is a critical component of the overall process. We also perform a comprehensive criminal check on each adult applicant. We do a full local, state, and national criminal archive check, a sex offender database check, and a meth lab database check to make sure we have responsible individuals. We don't want to hand the keys to your home over to someone that has a criminal record. In fact, we check every criminal database possible to make sure we only have the best tenants available with no criminal backgrounds. That's the most important thing we do to make sure we've found those most considerate and responsible adults for your home. Once we've fully screened the tenants, we can make limited exceptions to our screening criteria. In limited circumstances, exceptions may be made only for isolated credit or income issues, and they'll never be made for criminal issues. We would generally offer an exception provided there's a qualified cosigner for the lease. If we do recommend an exception, it'll also only be extended by mutual consent between the property owner and 33rd Company, because it's the owner who will be taking on some additional risk, and of course, 33rd Company will be managing that additional risk for you. We will never unilaterally deviate from the screening guidelines unless by mutual consent between 33rd Company and the property owner. So how would we mitigate risk for an exception? Generally, if a parent or other responsible adult can co-sign the lease for a residential home, that's an acceptable way to mitigate an isolated issue. We can also do a corporate lease in the case of an employee moving as part of a job relocation. For an income discrepancy, an example justifying an exception would be if we have, for instance, two unrelated adults both applying for the same home, and one of them meets the necessary income requirement, but the other one does not. That's a fairly common situation. The adult who doesn't meet the income requirement would need to have a qualified cosigner. This is acceptable as long as the applicant's credit is fine and there is no criminal activity. So that would be a prudent mitigation method in order to minimize the risk and allow the tenancy to go forward. For a credit problem, we can also mitigate isolated events as long as the income requirement is met and there's no criminal record. An example in this case would be a medical issue. A potential client would call us up, for instance, and say, "Oh, we love the house. Oh my God, get out of my way. Great home. One small problem. We've got a little bit of a problem with our credit. There's a gap or cap in their medical insurance, family emergency, $300,000 worth of chemo later, the only way out for them, bankruptcy." Sure enough, when we pull their credit report, oh yep, there it is, 18 months ago, bankruptcy from all of their medical bills. Their medical bills are discharged in bankruptcy, but all their other bills paid and paid on time. Hey, these are responsible adults. They got tripped up in a life event. They have no criminal record, and their income is great. They were just tripped up with this life emergency due to the medical issue. As long as we recommend and the owner agrees, an exception again could be made, typically using a cosigner. Again, this is another example in which a cosigner can be used to mitigate the issue and help these individuals as they try to rebuild their good name and their good credit. Also, there are some benefits. They probably won't be buying a home for several years. So there's a good chance you will also have a long-term tenant in place, which means less turnover, longer tenancy, and also it'll increase your net overall cash flow. This would be a win-win situation for both the tenant and the owner. By finding a good tenant from the start, it will lead to a multi-year tenancy that will not have any turnover or vacancy, and one that requires fewer leasing fees and advertising. And that's the perfect stable tenancy for a residential situation. Now, with regards to rent collection, 33rd Company has a policy. We generally don't allow tenants to pay rent directly. All of our tenants, through their lease agreement, are required to sign up for ACH automatic direct debit right from their checking or savings account. So on the first of every month, the rent comes out automatically. This adds a discipline in the rent collection process. It's a convenience for the renters, but also for the owners, because we also do automatic ACH distributions for the owners. Even a cosigner is required to sign an ACH form from his or her savings account. So the cosigner would be responsible additionally for rent, NSF charges, repairs, damages, late fees, you name it, for the entire duration of the tenancy. And once they fill out their ACH form, if we ever have an issue with collecting from a tenant and we're unable to collect the rent, we can just simply debit the cosigner's account, hit the send button, and we'll have the same day ACH draft coming right from the cosigner's bank account. That'll add stability and predictability to your cash flow. Obviously, as an owner with an expensive asset and additional financial obligations like mortgages and taxes that you have to pay, you want to make sure you've got stable cash flow. In fact, you want to make sure that you've got the most predictable rent payments coming in on a very regular basis. You need to make sure that you're in the best possible situation. And that's what 33rd Company can do for you. We structure leases so that you'll have the maximum probability of being paid on a regular and consistent basis. Once 33rd Company has found good, responsible applicants for your property, if they wish to commit on the home, they first have to fill out what we call a pre-lease deposit form and pay a pre-lease deposit, which is typically 1 month's rent. We will not take the home off the market until we receive a pre-lease deposit, which is non-refundable as long as they're screened, and that takes about 24 to 48 hours. Sometimes tenants can and do change their minds. Maybe they find a house in another city that's closer to work, and they want to back out of their application or their pre-lease agreement. Well, guess what? If they do that, the pre-lease deposit is non-refundable. This money then would go to the owner, you, because now we've taken the home off the market, and now we have to repost it, advertise it, show it. Could be another 30 days before we find another tenant. With a pre-lease deposit, you're going to be protected. You won't find yourself in a negative cash flow situation just because a tenant abruptly changed their mind. You won't have an extended vacancy or costs because the tenant has backed out after committing to the property initially. So as you can see, a pre-lease deposit is a great tool we use to make sure that the tenant is committed and vested moving forward, and they've got some skin in the game before we actually take the home off the market. Obviously, this money goes to you, and as I mentioned, it happens very infrequently. Thanks so much for listening to this video on tenant screening. We hope you can now better understand and appreciate all the work that a good property management does for you every day in screening and vetting applicants to make sure you've got the most responsible and considerate adults possible for your most valuable asset.